Good afternoon, everybody. How are you? We hope that you are well. I want to address something that is very misleading, or which has misled people, and namely the government's report on the decline in South Africa's GDP, a decline by 51% in the second quarter of 2020, namely the months of April, May, and June 2020, which results came out, I believe, yesterday, the 8th of September, or the previous day, the 7th of September. And Saitlon has reported it, just as the government reports it, as we always do, and some people have completely misunderstood it, and it has led to some sort of I don't know what the word is. And let me explain that there are different ways of reporting GDP. GDP, firstly, means gross domestic product. That means the value, the gross value of all of the goods and services produced within a country over a given period of time. So let's say that one country was this house, between these four walls, the house in which I live. And let's say that the value of the work that I produce for the purposes of this video is 10,000 Rand a month. In January of a certain year. Now let's say the next month I'm more productive and more industrious, and I go up by a little bit, and there's been a 5% increase month on month. That's a terrific performance. It's unheard of even in China. Now, if you take February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, if I increase by 5% every month, it won't be long, and I will have more than doubled my production. Because 5% on top of 5% on top of 5%, there's a cumulative effect. It becomes a very great number. So, in the USA and Europe, for instance, they report these things completely different to one another. So you might see the extent of the impact of the damage of the COVID-19 to the European economy in, say, the second quarter of 2020, and compare it to the United States economy and say, gracious me, but hasn't the United States been very detrimentally affected, and Europe not so much? When in fact you would be wrong, because they report it differently. And in fact, the detrimental effect upon the European economy's GDP for the second quarter of 2020 was far greater, by about a third, by about 9%. So early 30s to late 30s%. So there's about a third. It was about a third worse. That is to say, the amount of decline was about a third greater in Europe. But if you read the figures and you didn't understand properly, you would get it backwards. Okay. So if you're with me thus far, I can say the following to you. South Africa did not, by any stretch of the imagination, and Saitlon is not pretending that it did, but this is how the government reports the statistics. And whenever we regurgitate them, we do this knowing that this is the way that the South African government reports the statistics. Did not lose 51% of its economy just in 3 months. The decline in the South African economy, in the South African GDP, the loss, for the second quarter, again, it depends on how the comparison, but it's between about 16.4% and 17.1%. 16.4 is 17.1. So call it, for the sake of something easy to think about, let's split the difference and call it, and this is going to be very convenient, but it's not dishonest. We split the difference, and it brings us to about 16 2/3%. Right. Which gives us a very round number. 16 2/3%, 16.666 recurring, or 16.67 rounded off, is 1/6. Now, the loss of 1/6 of what the GDP, let's say, should have been. Again, this gets complicated. Do you measure it quarter versus quarter, like the Europeans do? Or do you measure it month versus month a year before? January compared to January. February compared to February. March, that's how they do it in the USA. Huh? Excuse me. All right. So without making this thing too complicated, for laymen like you and me, rather than using the misleading government way of reporting it, which we always do, but which in this case seems to have really perplexed people, really misled them. Let us look at it rather than that way. Let us look at it in much simpler terms and say that over those 3 months, the South African GDP was about 1/6 what we might have liked it to be, or what it should have been by fair comparison. Was reduced by a sixth less. So, if we expected to produce 100 apples, in fact, we produced only about 83 apples. If we expected to produce 100 billion rands worth of goods and services within the borders of South Africa, in fact, we produced 83 billion rands worth of goods and services over those 3 months. Now, I'm going to baffle you even further. Just really in the spirit of honesty and transparency. There's another variable, another factor that can be brought into this equation, namely inflation. How do you compare one year to another year, or January of one year to January of another year, or quarter 2 of one year to quarter 2 of another year? And how even do you compare quarter 2 to quarter 3 when there's inflation in between all of this stuff? So very often it's reported net of inflation. Okay, so this stuff can be tremendously complicated. And as I say to you, let's keep it simple by saying that we lost about 1/6. Now you might say, oh, gracious me, is that what the government meant? Is that what you guys have been reporting all of these months, talking about on video since August or September of 2019? Now I get it. All right, jolly good. But 1/6 is not all that much. Have you ever compared the height of a tall building to its length on the ground? In other words, if you took Ponte, the famous tall building, or the Carlton Towers in Johannesburg, and you lay it flat on the ground, you would discover that it's not nearly as long, or it appears not to be as long as it is tall. Let me give you for instance, an easy for instance. A 2-story building with a roof might be 4 meters per story, or less, but let's keep it simple, 4 meters per story, and a little bit on top, call it 3 meters. Let's call it 4 meters for the roof apex. It's nowhere near there, but that's 12 meters. Now you might measure out, you might pace out 12 meters on the floor and say, but that's nothing. That can't be right. It can't be right. It's not right. It is a very misleading thing. There's a word for it, but it's an error of perspective or something. I want to say error of parallax, but that's something else completely different. The same might be for those of you who've ever been to a concert in the dome at Northgate. The apex of the roof is, I believe, 42 meters. In any case, it's something like that. And from the floor beneath the apex of that dome, there's a word for it. It's not an apex, it's apogee. The apogee of the arc, I think, is the correct term. That point, that highest point, that furthest point. But if you paced out 40 meters in the parking area next to the dome, a structure that is famously known as the largest unsupported roof span in the southern hemisphere, or something like that. If you paced out 40 meters in the parking area, or the parking spaces, at, I suppose, something like 3 meters wide each, 13 parking bays, and it can't be right. Okay, so similarly, 1/6 loss of South Africa's GDP, 1/6 shrinkage, 1/6 decline of South Africa's GDP. Looking at it the other way now, might seem to you not to be all that much. But it is, in fact, beyond enormous. It is I'm trying to think of words that are not dramatic, but the only words that come to my mind are, it is life and death, ladies and gentlemen. Life and death. It is like a hammer blow to the skull of the Republic of South Africa. The reality is that it will take forever, so to speak, to recover from such loss. It just doesn't happen. There will be a bounce back now. There will be a huge bounce back in Q3 and in Q4. But by the same token, it's a bit like this. Let's say, God forbid, and may the Lord forbid it, you lost your job. You went from earning 10,000 Rand a month to 0,000 Rand a month. You might have the bounce back of all bounce backs, baby, when you get another job for 5,000 Rand a month. That's a huge bounce back from nil. In percentage terms, it's infinite. But it may take you years, even decades, to work your way up to the salary that you used to earn. And again, we're not even talking about the loss of the value of money through inflation. My dog is chasing a lizard or something. To work your way up to what you used to earn. So what we're saying is, when you lose 1/6 of your economy, it is such a tremendous mishap, such a tremendous misfortune, that it will take years for South Africa to fully recover from that. Many of the businesses that went out of business will never return. Many of them will go bankrupt, and the owners of the businesses will endeavor to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, but it will take them years to regain the scale and the profitability and so on of their business. So this 51% is really a very scary number. Whether you see it as 51 or you see it as 17.1 or you see it as, what was it, 16.4, 17.1, it is a very, very big thing. It is an alarming, frightening thing. And what's more, it is coupled with a tremendous gushing outflow of foreign capital from South Africa at present. And that is coupled with, these are not directly comparable things, but it is coupled with, as was it Magnus Haystack or Mike Schuessler? Mike Schuessler, who explained to us recently that the government is spending about 50 billion rand a month, almost 2 billion rand a day, more than it is bringing in revenue, in taxes. So you have this phenomenon where the state is spending far more than it can afford. There's a tremendous decline in tax income or revenue. There's a tremendous decline in gross domestic product. And all of these forces together are doing the South African economy tremendous harm. There are no two ways about that. And we urge you as Suidlanders to be cognizant of these terrible, or the terrible threat created by these awful circumstances. But you were saying there could be a bounce back from this hypothetical scenario of the person who was earning 10,000 rand a month and then went down and came back and what have you. Yes, but there's a delayed effect that we haven't felt yet. Many of the financial consequences of the pandemic lockdown of April, May, June, July, and August, we're now in September, will only be felt after that point in time. So let's say, for argument's sake, a business shut down on at the end of April. You might say, well, that would be the worst time, wouldn't it? That very day, shut down, no income, no operation. No, it wouldn't be, because the majority of the staff of the business, and indeed the business itself, would have money from their previous month's salary, their previous month's incomes, and from their savings to see them through the next days and weeks and months. It will only be after a certain point in time that the pain of what occurred in March or April is felt. So, we haven't felt the worst of it yet. There are dark days that lie ahead of us. And let it suffice to say that a 16 2/3% decline in the gross domestic production of goods and services of South Africa in one quarter, in a mere 3 months, is an extraordinary phenomenon to which there will be tremendous ramifications, even though in coming months we may expect a bit of a bounce back. Please excuse me, I've got a little bit of heartburn and it's causing me to hiccup. But thank you very much for watching the video. Please like it, share it, and subscribe it. Goodbye.